everyone brings something unique to the table. And if you can figure out what that is for you, then you're able to unleash that in almost every situation. And that helps you to build your confidence.
Welcome to the Prosper Brief. Today, we're honored to have Candace Barnes, Vice President and Global Head of Diversity, Talent, and Culture at Papa John's. Get ready to hear her insights on building inclusive workplaces and fostering leadership on a global scale.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Prosper Brief. Today, I'm fortunate enough to have Candace Barnes from Papa John's join us. We're at the forum.
We are.
And you're taking some time out of the general session to come join us here on the podcast. How's everything going at the forum so far?
You know, it's been wonderful. I remember being here last year. Last year was my first year attending. Although we had the hurricane coming our way, it was certainly bittersweet because I definitely didn't want to spoil all of the conversations that we have. And this year it hasn't disappointed.
Yeah,
so very much enjoyed.
That's great. Yeah. No hurricane on the forecast here
Correct.
This year, but so we can get through all of our content. We've got a ton of content today at the forum overall, and but I really appreciate you taking time out to talk with us. And,
Absolutely.
Meet with me and
I'm happy to be
go
here.
through this. Great. So just jumping into it, what is it about Papa John's that drew you to that company?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think Papa John's is a very unique brand and actually my first foray into this industry. So I joined Papa John's leaving the industrial manufacturing space. And I had been with that organization for quite some time, over 15, 16 years. And, you know, things were going well. I was enjoying that space. But I got a phone call, and it was the opportunity to explore something new that could be next for my career. And, you know, I'll tell you, I think it's a brand that's known, right? Yep. It's a brand that's out there. People have connection to. I remember having Papa John's for the first time in college. And at the same time, there were a lot of conversations around the brand as it related to DEI. And so if that was going to be a space I was going to go in, I wanted to ask some of those questions around, you know, where we were, what the company was doing. And I'll tell you, no one shied away from the conversations. It was the work that the company wanted to do, needed to do, and was already foraying in there. And then parallel to that, it was the people. You know, at the end of the day, if I was going to be leaving a company that I knew, I wanted to ensure it was a place that I felt like I would enjoy the people that I worked with. And it hasn't disappointed.
Yep, great. And just out of curiosity, have you had any experience in the food hospitality industry prior to Papa John's?
You know what? That's a great question. Very, very early on. So I was one of those folks that were a server back in the day. So a couple of different restaurants. I did more of a kind of like your Chili's, Applebee's type of concept. And then I also worked at a fine steakhouse as well.
Very cool.
So got a chance to do both of
Very
those.
cool. I was at a business conference a couple of weeks ago, not in the industry, and they asked how many people in a very large, like 10,000 people, how many people started in the food industry, and it was about half of and this was not the industry too. So yeah, it's a common theme. But it's a good reminder how the industry is a great trainer for people to get into the business in not even this industry, but to learn and develop skills they could use in other industries as well, very, very early on. So yeah, I like hearing everybody's story about that. Yeah. So how does Papa John's prioritize DE&I?
You know, that's a great question. I think it's one where they've done a very good job. And that was one of the things that I was eyeing for as I joined the company, of really building it into the fabric of the organization. You know, our number one strategic priority is to build a culture of leaders that believe in diversity, inclusivity, and winning. And because of that, right, it shows up in everything we do. We know that's part of the profitability of the business. In order for us to be successful, to give the customers the product that they want, we need to have the right folks at the table, different perspectives, bringing innovation. And it also sits squarely within our values. I think my two favorites are people first and everyone belongs. And I think it goes very much right in line with how we think of the conversation around DEI and how it becomes an integral part of how we do business day to day.
And then for engaging groups outside of Papa John's and to have a cast your net wide, how do you do that? How does Papa John's approach that with, I guess, on a hiring, recruiting basis, but as a customer basis too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an important part to consider. So if you think of like on the talent side of things, we've really looked at where are the right opportunities to tap in. I mean, with being a restaurant business, often a lot of those are local outreach within different markets that we're partnering with. We have a couple of more national partners that we work with, such as the United Negro College Fund with students and how we bring a student pipeline into the organization, and then also the National Black MBA Association. I also think of national partnerships or things like this with Prosper too. And as this opportunity came our way last year, many of the partnerships that are out there aren't directly within the industry. And so being able to, have the conversations with David and with Hattie and with Luke, right, to understand what they were trying to create, it felt like it would be wrong if we weren't here, right? If we weren't a part of participating in this.
So in Papa John's, you guys send a few people to the Accelerator program. You have a couple of Prosper Accelerators. What drew you to the program, and how has that been so far?
Oh, I think that's a great question. To me, that's one of the differentiators of partnering with Prosper. If not only is it an industry event to where we can come to the forum every year, but it very much goes to the idea of how do we develop the next generation of talent. And so by us being able to nominate, so we have 3 accelerators this year. And it's broad based too. So we have one that's in our operations space, one that's within marketing, and then one that's within our supply chain. So we're vertically integrated on the supply chain side. So it was important for us to look across. At a minimum, we've got at least one that we can nominate in each of those spaces. So how can we do that? It also demonstrates to them our investment in their career. And so them getting a chance to network with others that are like them in the industry. I think often those that are maybe underrepresented feel as though they're in that only environment a lot. And so them having that opportunity to build that network and then bring all of those pieces back to Papa John's is invaluable.
No, and I think the other aspect of it too, and I think a lot of people through their career, it's hard to envision yourself as that next CEO, that next leader. I couldn't do that. I didn't go to the school that everybody goes to hold that position. I didn't come from that background that everybody holds that position. And it's nice. I think the content yesterday here at Prosper, actually talking about the CEOs, where these CEOs got started as washing dishes. And they didn't go to the schools you think they should have gone to be CEO of a large. And I think hearing this story and saying, hey, look, I see myself in that background, or even my background might have been better than that person's background. Like they did that. I could do that. And it's powerful. I think, for me, a valuable lesson for everybody, and the accelerators, it's good to hear that, I think.
Absolutely. It's that concept of you've got to see it to believe that it's possible. And they uniquely get a chance to access differently than they probably would otherwise. So the number of leaders and CEOs that are here and are present, taking time out of their schedule to invest in them from a development perspective is absolutely invaluable. It's something I wish I had when I was at that point in my career.
I know. Well, and somebody made the comment, James Fripp from Yum Brands yesterday, that this content that they were getting from these leaders yesterday, your organization couldn't afford to get these leaders to come in and speak and share that content. And it was so rich. I was learning from it. It was really impressive, and great opportunity for them to learn. And to your point too, it's not even just learning the lessons, but rubbing shoulders and being able to connect and talk with these leaders in the industry and see yourself as the next leader.
So awesome. I think it's funny. They tell you this early on in your career, that it's often who you know, not what you know, and you don't really realize the impact of that until you get a little bit later in your career. But this is that opportunity for them to build the who you know.
And I'm realizing too, it helps the people, and not necessarily mentors, but the leaders to recognize, and say, and help you come up too. And that's what I really like about the hospitality industry. Like, you ask anybody for help, they're there to help.
Yeah.
And give you some advice. So
Absolutely.
it's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's hard. And I can understand, from the accelerators too. I mentioned this a lot. They're really leaders already in our industry.
Yes.
I look at that list of accelerators. It's impressive to start with. And to say they're the next generation leader, I think is a little misleading in a way. They are leaders already, but I think it's pushing them to say, hey, look, you're the next CEO, you're the next C-suite leader in the industry, and recognizing them for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You make a good point.
Yeah. So great. So coming into Papa John's, your role has changed since the organization now also includes leading the talent functions. If you could tell us about that and how you go about recruiting and looking into talent.
Absolutely. And so kind of give a little bit of background on that. So when I joined Papa John's, it was specifically to lead DEI and culture within the organization. And then it was maybe 8 months in or so, our leadership made a decision to restructure and how that was set up. And so had intentionality on pulling in talent management and talent acquisition to be lockstep with DEI. And what I loved about that, so kind of the way I grew up in DEI was almost a part of some of the talent functions. And so instead of having a separate DEI leader, it was within one of those functions. And the beauty of that is if the work of DEI is done right, it's done in partnership with the rest of the HR function. And so the foresight and leadership was there to really say, in order to be thinking holistically about this, let's put it under a single umbrella to where you've got the lens across the teams.
Okay.
And it's been kind of amazing to just see how the teams have shown up, how they've partnered with one another over the last several months.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So it's been a few months then you've been incorporating this?
It has since the beginning of the calendar year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So we've been moving into it.
And have you been seeing change?
We have. I mean, I feel like the couple of highlights that I felt like we've seen is a lot of the teams were partnering together when they needed to for projects, and now it becomes more organic.
Okay.
One of the big pieces of feedback, even all throughout the organization. So if you think of like our recruiters as an example that are a part of the team, they may not be as readily in conversations with a talent management leader about, a project that's coming up on leadership development. But now they have that insight, and that could be a conversation they could go have with someone that maybe is looking to join us from a recruiting perspective.
Okay.
And so being able to see that lens across is hugely helpful. And then to be, for the DEI team, for them to be hearing the day-to-day aspects that are happening within the talent functions, then they can use that lens to say, do we have an equitable process, right? Are there places where maybe this group doesn't have the exact same access to another, and do we need to maybe approach that differently?
Okay.
So it's been great.
Great. So in closing, for the accelerators out there and anyone who's ever experienced the feeling of being the only, what advice would you give them? And kind of like this doubt that we talked about earlier, like I don't see myself in that position. And I think it happens to a lot of us.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be in a visible underrepresented group to experience that only feeling either. And so, I really try and think about taking that experience and almost bottling it a little bit, because it also can be a great catalyst for how do you take risks? How do you lean in? But what I'd also say, and we heard this earlier from Aaron Powell when he was talking about superpowers. Yeah. That's one of my favorite concepts because everyone brings something unique to the table. And if you can figure out what that is for you, then you're able to unleash that in almost every situation. And that helps you to build your confidence. And so in those times where you're feeling doubt or where you're unsure or imposter syndrome creeps in. We always all have it at some point.
Yep.
How do you then put that cape on, put that piece of armor on, because you know what you're really good at,
Yep.
and you know what you can excel out. Find that, hone that, figure what the out is, and continue to push forward.
That's such a great point. Such a great point. Like, and I don't, growing up, it was always like, how do you improve where you're weak?
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought I had to improve your weaknesses. But now, just, I don't know, the last 10 years or so of my career, it's just really, what are you good at, and double down on that and go with that.
That shift is so important.
Yeah.
I feel like in our society, we don't talk enough about the positives. We hone in on the negatives so often. Somewhat natural.
Right.
Like the performance review conversation earlier today.
And even just your self-doubt. I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
That's where you go instead of my strengths. And it's always like, how do I improve myself? How do I do this better? So it's a good reminder for everybody to keep that in mind.
It is.
Yeah.
It
One
is.
last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got a lot of options for conferences and everything. Why Prosper? We spoke about this a little bit earlier, but why do you keep coming back?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like there's a lot of industry events. There's a lot of outside of industry events. What I found uniquely different here is the caliber of the conversation. So not only main stage conversations, I feel like the topics are often ones where people don't lean into truth telling as often. And there's a lot of truth telling that happens here in a very, in a way that allows everyone to hear the truth telling. And then parallel, really the networking, the conversations, everyone really coming to a space where we can have shared understanding, shared reflections. Not everyone has to have the same opinion, and that's okay, and that's expected. So to me, that's been the best part about the event and why I continue to come back.
Great. Well, I appreciate your time today, Candace.
Absolutely.
And,
Thank you for having me.
Have a good rest of the conference.
Thanks. You too.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation with Candace Barnes, please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more inspiring stories from our industry leaders. We'll see you next time here on the Prosper Brief.